Okay, so today what we're talking about is something called the quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula? Well, the quadratic formula is the thing we use when the X game and the box don't work. So when that step does not work, the X, where we multiply A times C and add up to be B, when that does not work, when this step right here, more specifically this part right here, this step right here, when this step right here does not work, means how does it not work? When I get a number up here and down here that I can't find anything that works. I can't find anything that multiplies to be the top number but adds up to be the bottom number. It just doesn't exist, right? When that doesn't work, we have to have another method, another way of doing it, and that's when we use the quadratic formula. Okay, so we don't use it a lot, but there are some times when we need to use it. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on today. Quadratic formula, you've all done in Math 2. If you don't remember how to use it or you don't remember it, you did it in Math 2, but we're just kind of going over it just so that we're all on the same page. Okay, so a lot of today might be like, I've done that before. You probably have. Okay, so that's the only time we use the quadratic formula, and that's the quadratic formula right there. -1 times b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So when do we use it? Well, first of all, it has to be in standard form. So same directions as last time. First step was always get it in standard form, set it equal to 0. That has to be done. We need to solve it. So you don't use the quadratic formula to factor, you use it to solve. When we want 2 answers, right? Remember 2 answers that we put in 2 separate boxes? That's when we use it. Or to find the x-intercepts, which is the same thing. And factoring does not work. This guy does not work. This guy does not work, then we have to use a different method. Okay? That's pretty much what it says. So let's get started. First one. A lot of these problems are going to look very similar. If you notice, it says solve. It says solve the equation, and then it gives you an equation. Okay? So we're going to solve it like we normally do. So like we normally did was we set it equal to 0, right? When we solved it, we needed to set it equal to 0. All right, that's what we have always done, and that's what we're going to continue to do. That's always step 1. So to get it equal to 0, I need to add 6 to both sides. So when I add 6, I'm going to add 6 to -13. So I get 3x squared minus 2x minus 7 equals 0. Okay, that was in standard form. Okay, so our next step, ABC, right? ABC. A equals, B equals, C equals. A is 3, B is -2, C is -7. Okay. Our next step was always to do this guy here, right? So we multiply A times C, which is -21, add to be -2. And then we kind of think to ourselves, what are the 2 numbers that multiply to be -21, but add up to be -2? Let's see. So -21, we have -7 times 3, -3 times 7, -21 times 1, and -1 times 21. I think those are the only things, the ways to get -21. I don't think there's any other way. So we look and see which ones, if I add them, make -2. The first one, if I add it, makes -4. The second one makes +4. This one makes -20. And then the last one makes +20. So none of them, there's no 2 numbers that work when I do that, right? If that happens, then I have to use the quadratic formula. I have no choice. The only way to solve it is by using the quadratic formula. Okay? So when I write the quadratic formula, I'm going to write it all just like you see it on the board or you see it right here. except instead of A, B, and C, I'm going to put parentheses. Parentheses. So anywhere there's an A, B, or C, I'm going to put parentheses. Okay? So we have -1 times B plus or minus, and then I have a square root B squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. See, I use parentheses for all of those missing. Now I'm going to plug them in. A is 3, so A goes down here, and A goes right there. Next one is B. B goes here and goes here. And then the last one is C. C only goes right there. Okay? Now I have to use math. I have to use my math skills. PEMDAS, or GEMS. Some teachers teach GEMS instead of PEMDAS. Whichever one, it works the same. Parentheses, P, or G for grouping symbols, means either parentheses. So we have parentheses here, here. But inside of all of these parentheses, I already have just a number, right? There's nothing needs to be simplified inside the parentheses. Okay. But I do have a grouping symbol. That guy right there is a grouping symbol. It grouped all of these guys together. So I have to do what's in there first. Okay. So what's in there, first of all, is -2 squared. What is -2 times itself? Oops. Or not -4, because it's -2 times itself. So negative times a negative makes positive. Yeah, so 4. Okay, so 4. And then I have to multiply -4 times +3 times -7. So what do you get when you multiply all 3 of those guys? First of all, I'm going to get a positive, right? It's going to be a positive number. So it's going to be plus. And I believe when you multiply, you get 84, if I remember correctly. Okay. And then you're going to add them together, right? When I add them together, I'm going to get 88. Okay. Now out here, I can multiply these two guys. -1 times -2, +2. And on the bottom of the fraction, it's 2 times 3, 6. So I end up getting 2 plus or minus the square root of 88 over 6. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. That's not our answer, but I'm going to stop right there. Okay. When we solved last week, how many answers did we always get when we solved? At least. Sometimes we got more than that, but how many answers did we usually get? 2, right? 2, at least 2. Sometimes we even got 3. Okay? We're going to have 2 answers today. We're going to have 2 answers today. Okay? That's where the plus and minus comes from. So what that plus and minus means is we're going to do both of them, not at the same time, separately. So this is what I'm going to have. I have 2 answers. The first answer I'm going to get by taking 2 and adding it to the square root of 88, and then dividing by 6. And then the other one I'm going to get by subtracting 2 minus the square root of 88 over 6. Okay? Now the square root of 88 is not a whole number. It's like 9.2, 9.3, something like that. It's not a whole number. It's not a pretty number. Okay? That's what we're going to use the calculator. And you notice the last 4 words of the question want us to round to the nearest tenth, right? So we got to round our answer. We're going to need to round our answer. So this is how we're going to do it. In your calculator or on your Delta Math, you're going to go to the calculator. So the calculator's down there at the bottom. And you're going to put exactly what they have. So they have division, right? We have division. So we're going to put a division symbol. Oops. We're going to do the first one. The first one says 2 plus the square root of 88 divided by 6. So that's what we're going to do. 2 plus the square root of 88, and then on bottom, 6, right? Two plus the square root of 88 all divided by 6. It looks like just like my paper. That's what I want it to. So then I go to the right, and I get 1.896805253. We don't, well, first of all, that's not the last number. My calculator just said, I'm not going to write any more numbers. That's it. I'm done. Okay, it stopped. So how far do we need to write it? Well, we look at the directions. The direction said the 10th, right? The 10th spot, right? So which number is in the 10th spot? Anyone know what number is in the 10ths? Is it 8? It's going to be right to the decimal. Is it 896805253? Which one is it? The 10th. It's the first 8, right? It's the 8.8. So the guy behind it is 9. So 9 says, what should I do to the 8? Round up. So what I'm going to write down isn't 1.896805253. I'm going to just write the part they want me to, 1.9. 1.9. I'm not going to worry about the rest. 1.9. That's it. You are done with that one. I don't have to write the rest of the numbers because I rounded to the nearest 10th. Okay. So now let me do the second one. The second one is almost identical, just it has a minus in the middle instead of a plus. Okay, so let's see if I can do this. So I'm going to scroll back, and instead of a plus, I'm going to put a minus now. I'm going to put a minus in there. So now I get negative 1.2301385887. Again, the 10th. The 10th is that 2.2, negative 1.2. The 3 after it says don't go up, stay where you're at. So negative 1.2. Negative 1.2, that's what I'm going to write. And you're done. 2 boxes, 1.9, negative 1.2. Here's the thing though. I've seen a lot of people miss this question because they don't put 1.9. They put this. They put 1.89 in their answer. And Delta Math says it's wrong because it is. It's not rounded to the correct number, right? You've got to round to the correct number. Or they do this. They just go 1.8 because it said 1.8. That's not rounded, right? So you got to be careful. Got to be careful with how you round. Only round at the end. Otherwise, Delta Math is going to say it's wrong, okay? Even though you're technically doing it correctly, you're rounding wrong. So just make sure you be careful when you round, okay? Just be careful when you round. Only round at the end. That was the only time I rounded. I didn't round anywhere else except the end, okay? All right, so let's go to the back now. Let's go to the back. Directions are a little different now. They still say solve, but it says solve the equation for all real solutions. That just means give me all the answers. That's all it means. Nothing's going to change. Okay, round your answer to the nearest 10th if necessary. So don't let that change. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is set it equal to 0. So I'm going to add a y squared to the y squareds. So I get 20y squared minus 13y plus 2 equals 0. Okay. Some students, I've had some students in the past go right to the quadratic formula and say A, B, C, boom, right? That works. That quadratic formula, that's the nice thing about the quadratic formula. It works 100% of the time. If you wanted to do every single problem using that guy, it would work. But a lot of people don't like to use it because it's very mathy. There's a lot of calculations, right? So what I say is let's use our old steps first. If those don't work, then we can use quadratic formula. Because sometimes I'm telling you, they'll slip in one. Even today, they'll slip one in where you don't need to use the quadratic formula. You can if you want, but you don't need to. Okay? So I skipped this step last one. We should talk about this one. Before ABC, is there a GCF? Is there a number I can divide all three of these terms by? 20x squared, negative 3y, and positive 2. Now 13 ruins it, right? 13 is not even, and yeah, 13 doesn't work. 20 can be divided by 2, and 2 can be divided by 2, but not negative 13. Okay, so here we go. A, B, C. So from here, could I go directly to the quadratic formula? Yeah, you could. It would work. It will work, but it's not necessary. Okay, it's not necessary. We can try to see if the x works. If it does work, then we don't have to do those. Let's see if it works. So multiply to be 40 and add up to be negative 13. And I believe there are numbers, right? I believe there are two numbers that multiply to be 40 and add up to be negative 13. Let's see. 40, 20 times 2, 40 times 1, 10 times 4, 8 and 5. Is there anything else? I think that's it. So none of those numbers add up to be negative 13. But I could tweak it, right? 8 times 5. If I make them both negative, that still gives me 40, but it adds up to be negative 13. So it's negative 8 and negative 5. So this one does work. So we're going to use the steps we've been using. So I have 20y squared, positive 2, negative 8y, negative 5y. So this one we're going to use the steps we've been using from last week. Okay, so I get y times y. So I have a couple different ways to make 20. I can go 10 times 2 or 10 times 2. I can say 4 times 5 or 5 times 4. Or I can say 20 times 1 or 20 times 1. It all depends on what works, right? Which one will work? Well, there's only one of them that works. Well, I look down here, I have a negative 8. So if I put a 10 here, it doesn't go into negative 8. It's too big. So 10 can't go there. If I put a 10 here, it goes in here twice, but it doesn't go in here evenly. 10 doesn't fit into negative 5. It's too big. So 10 and 2 won't work. How about 4 and 5? So if I put a 4 here, doesn't go into negative 5 evenly. Let me switch them. Put a 5 here. 5 goes into 5 negative once, and 4 goes into negative 8, negative 2. That looks like it works. And to top it all off, negative 2 times negative 1, when I multiply them, it makes positive 2. So I know I did it right. Every box is correctly done. Okay. All right, so now I get 5y minus 2, 4y minus 1 equals 0, because I'm solving. All right, this guy is the same thing as this guy. So the last step is I have to get my answers. So set them both equal to 0. And then solve. So over here, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. Then I'm going to divide by 5. So I get 2/5 as one of my answers. And I get 1/4 as another one, 2 fractions. Okay. Since they're fractions, make sure they're reduced. You don't have to change them to decimals. We only use decimals if we have to. Okay. All right, so I want you to try number 3 now. Try number 3 on your own. Give number 3 a shot, see what you get. Okay, so for this guy, set it equal to 0 by subtracting p squared. So I got 5p squared plus 10p plus 2 equals 0. A is 5, B is 10, C is 20. What I should have done is GCF, but there was no GCF for those guys. I can divide by 5 here and 5 here, but then here I can't divide by 5. I can divide by 2 here and 2 here, but 5 I can't divide by 2. So there was no GCF besides 1. So then I go A times C, add it to be B. The only numbers that multiply to be 10 are 10 and 1 and 5 and 2. And none of them, when I add them together, make 10. So this doesn't work. So I only have one option, which is the quadratic formula for this one. Okay, so I get -1 times b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. Okay, so 10 goes here because it's b. It also goes here. 5 goes here, 2 goes here, and 5 goes down there since it's a. All right, so now I get -10 plus or minus 100 minus 60. No, 40. 100 minus 40. Because -4 times 5 times 2 is -40 over 10. So when I simplify that, I get -10 plus or minus the square root of 60 divided by 10. The square root of 60 isn't a whole number. It's like 7 point something. It's like 7.8, 7.7, something like that. Okay, so I have -10 plus the square root of 60 divided by 10. And I have -10 minus the square root of 60 divided by 10. I'm going to use my calculator to do those. Okay, so -10, oops, let me do division first. -10 plus the square root of 60 divided by 10. I get that number. -0.2254, so on and so forth. Well, the first two, 0.2, that number is in the tenths, the first two. The two after it says stay where you're at. So my answer is going to be negative 0.2. Okay. Let me go back with multiplication or with subtraction now. Subtraction. So instead of addition, now I have subtraction. Negative 1.774596, blah, 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 blah. Keeps going. Well, the first seven's in the tenths. The 7 behind it is big enough so that now that 7 can go up to 8. So negative 1.8. Done. Okay, the only time I rounded was at the very, very end. That's the only time you round. Okay, sometimes I have students try to round this guy right here. Before they add, they try to round it. So they'll go in their calculator and put square root of 60. They'll do that. They'll say, let's see. They'll say square root of 60. 7.7. And then they'll add and divide. Don't do that because I'm rounding too soon. Only round at the very end. Only round at the very end. That's the only time you're going to round. Otherwise, Delta Math will say it's wrong because it's rounded wrong. Okay. All right. So last one. Last one will be done. Example number 4. I want you to work on example number 4. I'll give you some time to do that one now. Okay. So I got to set it equal to 0. Okay. Okay. 2x squared plus 18x plus 13 equals 0. Second step, GCF. Well, again, the first two, there is a GCF, but 13 kind of ruins it again because 13, only 1 and 13 go into it. So there is no GCF for all three. Okay, so let me do ABC. 2, 18, and 13. So multiply to be 26, add to be 18. The only things that multiply to be 26 are 13 and 2 and 26 and 1. 13 and 2 is close, but that adds up to be 15, not 18. So now that does not work. So negative 1 times b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So 18 goes here and goes here. 2 goes here and here, and 13 goes here. Okay. So negative 18 plus or minus. 18 times 18 is 324. Minus 4 times 2 times 13, which is negative 104, I believe. Over 4. So we get negative 18 plus or minus, and then when I subtract, I get 220. So 220, the square root of 220, let's see. Let me go check what the square root of 220 is. 14.8323, it's an ugly number. Okay, so that means I'm going to have two answers. I'm going to have negative 18 plus 220, square root of 220. over 4, and negative 18 minus the square root of 220 over 4. Okay, so now I got to go to delta math. I'm going to put 1 in first. I'll put the plus 1 in first. So what was it? Negative 18 plus 220. Negative 18 plus square root of 220. And then on bottom was a 4. Yep. Negative 0.7919007565. The one that's in the tenths is the 7, the first 7. Behind it is a 9. So that means I round up to negative 0.8. That's my first answer. Second answer. Let me change that minus in between them to a plus. Let me go back. Oops, sorry. Change it, the plus to a minus, sorry. Negative 8.280999244. So the 2 is in the tenths. Behind it is a 0, so that means it stays the same, negative 8.2. Remember, those are x-intercepts. Remember what x-intercepts mean. For today, you don't need this, but when we take a test, you will need it. X-intercepts mean that's where it crosses the x-axis. So negative 0.8 would be right about there. Oops. Negative 8.2 would be a little bit past there. So it would look something like that. Okay. Again, that's not on today's, but when we take a test, that will be, because we talked about graphing earlier. Okay, those are the x-intercepts. All right. Okay, so today you can tape. There should be some tape in the back. I think I'm down some tape. I got to find some tape, but you can tape in your notes wherever this goes.